All right then. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar hosted by CEP Ottawa on the circular economy. My name is Karthik Murthy, and I'm the VP of Marketing at CEP Ottawa, and I'll be your host for today. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for the continuous support that you've given us so far. We really appreciate the feedback that we've received from you, and we are continuously trying to improve our content that we give you. For those who couldn't register for this event, you can keep track of the CEP Ottawa events by subscribing to our newsletter at our website, cepottawa.org, or even subscribing to the CEP Ottawa YouTube channel. We keep our events updated on our websites, and we have a lot more events actually coming to you soon. So stay tuned. A little bit about CEP Ottawa. Connecting Environmental Professionals Ottawa is a non-profit-led organization dedicated to creating opportunities for emerging and established environmental and sustainability professionals. Our mission is to facilitate constructive dialogue and inspire action on key environmental and sustainability issues, one of which is the topic that we are actually going to talk about today, the circular economy. In terms of timekeeping, we would have the first 20 minutes where we would have our speaker, Marena Winstanley, who I'll introduce shortly, presenting about the circular economy. That would then be followed by a conversation with Marena and me, where we would dig a little bit deeper into the issues concerning the circular economy. And the last 20 minutes would be the audience questions, where your questions that you have would be answered. Please do not hesitate to post your questions. We have Lucas who's the president of CEP Ottawa, who will be our moderator for the event, and he will be noting down all the questions that you have, and those would be asked during the audience question time. Now let me introduce the speaker to you, Marena Winstanley. She is the Director of Partner Engagement at the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition and the Senior Program Advisor at the World Circular Economy Forum Strategic Policy Directorate at the Environment of Climate Change Canada. She bridges the circular economy policy and business worlds through her work with both the Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition. Across both, her focus is on programming the upcoming World Circular Economy Forums and convening these circular economy stakeholders to share, learn, and collaborate. Marena has a decade of experience creating change through dialogue, learning, and collective action in pursuit of sustainability. She previously worked at Smart Property Institute, building partnerships of business, government, academic, and NGOs to support the adoption of the carbon policy. The Institute counts the federal carbon price, low carbon fuel standards, and a capital cost allowance for green energy amongst its policy successes. A big picture thinker who sweats the details, Marena worked as the sustainability consultant to Indigenous organizations, industry associations, and federal, territorial, provincial, and municipal governments. Her other work experience has focused at the community level, having worked for Future Cities Canada and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. She holds a Master of Arts in Public Administration and Policy with a focus on innovation, environment, and science from Carleton University. She moved to Ottawa from Vancouver, where she completed a Bachelor of Arts in Sustainability. She is trained in facilitation and systems thinking and is a co-author of an internationally cited paper on organizational learning and sustainability. Without any further ado, let me present to you Marena Winstanley. Marena, the stage is yours.
Hello, Karthik. Thank you so much for that introduction. Remind me to write shorter bios in the future. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here today and to share with you a little bit about circular economy. A big part of my job is kind of spreading the word, trying to get more people involved and joining the international dialogue from a Canadian perspective. So I'm just going to jump right into things here and share my screen. So hopefully that's coming through on your side. So today I just kind of want to talk about what is a circular economy and what are the opportunities. So the easiest way of thinking about the circular economy is an economy without a tailpipe. I also sometimes like to call it, your grandmother's common sense approach to designing an economy. It's where waste becomes food, trash becomes cash. Instead of our linear economy model of take, make, waste, you actually create a circular or a loop in which you design waste out of the system. And you diversify the incomes that businesses can use. Instead of paying to dispose of waste, they can actually sell it to somebody else who will then use it in their own processes. So it's a really exciting concept. It's kind of an evolution from sustainable development concepts, and we can get into that a little bit more if you want to hear about it. But it's something that's kind of coming to us from Europe, who's been working on this for a while. They have a new deal that they've just brought in, which is very focused on bringing in the circular economy. It's a new idea for Canadians and North Americans, but we think it's one that is really going to take off here. So I kind of put the dry version of the definition here from the European Commission, but it's very clear and to the point. So I thought I would start with that. So a lot of people, when they think about what to do with waste, they think about recycling, reducing, reusing, but there's a lot more to that. There's repairing, there's reconstructing, and a lot of it comes down to starting with design. So making sure that from the very beginning, you're thinking about how this product will be used at the end of its life cycle, and other ways that that product could be used after the consumer has disposed of it in the first place. So I have here a diagram that kind of shows the flow of how circular economy could go. Of course, it's very idealized. And the key is that you're not eliminating raw materials from coming into the system. You're just really reducing the number of resources that you need for each product. So kind of the resource intensity. And that those would flow through and continue to go along as much as possible. And ideally, at the end of it, you'd be able to kind of put back into the soil what you've taken out of it in terms of regeneration. So one example for that is bioeconomy. So if you create paper and then you recycle it, and then perhaps in the end, it actually becomes ashes at the end of its life cycle. Well, then you would then put those ashes back into the soil to produce the full loop and grow more trees. So that's kind of the end vision of a circular economy, and that's why we kind of use this circular loop. But it's not to say that it's a closed loop, that there are no new resources being brought in and that there is no waste. I think that goes against the second law of thermodynamics. But there is much room between what we do now, which is all this single-use plastics, all this furniture that is essentially designed to have a certain lifespan and then thrown away. Between that and where we need to be in terms of a circular economy, there's a lot of progress to be made. So in terms of what's going on in the world, as Kartik mentioned, I'm working on the World Circular Economy Forum. And the World Circular Economy Forum is a big conference that happens every year. It is run by Sitra, which is the Finnish Innovation Fund. And they have been doing this for a number of years now, mostly based in Helsinki. And this is the first time that the World Circular Economy Forum will be in North America. Now, initially, Canada was supposed to host it in Toronto this September, but with the pandemic, we have gone online. So we now have the WCF online, which anybody can join. And I have my contact information at the end if you would like to kind of reach out to me, and I will send you the information that you need to register for this. It's being broadcast out of Helsinki, so the time zones are a little bit inconvenient for us North Americans, but we at the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition are kind of running the North American session. And that will be at a time that works for us here. And that will be an interesting session, I hope, because we're really trying to broaden the conversation that's happening around circular economy to include resource-based economies such as Canada, and really trying to figure out like how can we make this a global movement rather than something that is really just happening within the European Union, and then kind of a scattering of businesses here and there that have picked this up. Also, in April 2021, the Netherlands is hosting a political level event that is geared towards kind of mainstreaming circular economy ideas through the COP process. COP26 has been postponed until September of 2021. And so it gives us a little bit of time to get into the negotiation process and start pushing some circular economy ideas and issues forward. And so that is going to be hosted at the Netherlands, and that it'll be mostly politicians and CEOs. And then in September in 2021, we have the original in-person, which is again happening in Toronto, which I'm helping to program in my role at Environment Canada. And that will be by invitation only, but we're hoping to stream as much of it as possible. Again, reach out to me if you're interested in being part of it. And there'll be more information coming on that one, but we're kind of looking at a broad level of topics, but really bringing a Canadian focus to the conversation about world circularity. I'm happy to provide more information on any of those events. So if you have questions, please send them my way. So if you would like, this is my slide here where I invite you again to reach out to me. At the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition, we have a number of activities that are coming up that you might be interested in participating in. We have a Circular Economy Solutions series that we're working on launching in the fall. And it'll be a series of webinars that really just cover the gamut of topics on circular economy, everything from food to fashion to mining to energy. And it's really meant to kind of introduce the topic to as many people as possible and kind of galvanize people to really take this up and make this an issue that they're passionate about. As I mentioned, you can also reach out to me to talk about WCF Online. And there's also a number of side events that we're inviting people to run on their own. They're independent events, but they'll have a WCF Online branding on them. And if you have an event that you're thinking about maybe putting on that could be a circular economy event, please reach out and we can talk more about it and see how we can perhaps collaborate. And then I also wanted to say plastics is the most tangible piece that is really moving forward right now in circular economy, especially in Canada. There's, of course, the single-use plastics ban that is coming in a few years, but also we're seeing a really like a groundswell of interest from corporations who really want to reduce their plastic use and are unsure how to do it. And what is the best role for plastics in our economy? We'll never be able to get rid of them. But how do we best use them? How can we reuse them? How can we recycle them? These are all kind of questions that we're really getting involved in. And again, in the fall, we're going to be launching a big initiative under plastics that I think people here will be interested in. So I think I ran a little bit faster than I was anticipating, but that's the end of my 20-minute presentation. And I'd be happy to talk about other questions that come through or ones that you have.
Right. Thank you so much, Marena, for your wonderful presentation. I certainly got to understand a lot more about the circular economy. To me, the circular economy was only about take, make, and reuse. But the diagram that you showed, where there are a lot more stakeholders involved in the circular economy, is something that I've really learned about. And your speech, I mean, your passion and your depth of knowledge on the topic really came out in this. So before I actually go on to asking you questions about the circular economy, I wanted to get an understanding about you as a person, your motivations to wanting to join the circular economy in the first place. How did you personally get into this field, and what motivated you to get into the circular economy?
Thank you. I was thinking about this a little bit. I think in many ways, kind of the circular economy found me. I'm older than I perhaps look, and did my master's quite a number of years ago. And at the time, there was ecological economics, cradle to cradle, all these kinds of focus on resources was a big thing. But then as I got into the workforce, I really found that most of the work was focused on carbon and energy and reducing climate change, which of course is paramount. But not that many people were talking about resources. Not that many people were talking about consumption. And I think that largely because it became politically difficult to talk about consumption, because people thought that maybe you were telling them they had to like not drive their cars anymore or not buy new clothes or all these kinds of things. And that can be very politically unpalatable. But in terms of how I actually arrived at circular economy, I used to work for the Smart Prosperity Institute. And when the carbon tax came in, we all kind of were like, yay, now what? And quite literally, we like had a little party, and then the next day we were like, well, now what do we do? And really, the climate change conversation is all about energy. And then so we really started to be like, no, that's only half of the equation. We have to start talking about resources, particularly in a place like Canada, where our economy is based on resource production. So we have to get a handle on how to do that sustainably in order to future-proof our economy, in order to maintain our standing in the world and our livelihoods. We have to kind of figure out a way of doing that in a sustainable way. And so circular economy kind of bubbled up as the idea that really kind of captured our attention. And then so SPI was part of launching the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition alongside a number of large corporations and a number of NGOs as well. And they launched at the G7 alongside the Prime Minister. And that really kind of started the conversation. And then we also kind of worked with the minister's office to be like, hey, there's the Circular Economy Forum. That might be a really good way to start getting people in Canada to talk about this issue. And so we put in an application, and luckily Citra chose Canada as the host. And so for me, they came to me and they were like, hey, you have a background in kind of both convening and circular economy stuff. Can you kind of help us put together a program? And I really am enjoying kind of the two pieces that I'm working on with Environment Canada. I'm on the programming side, especially for 2021. I'm really deep into the like who is saying what to who. And on the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition side, I really get to hear the individual stories from these small startups that are trying like new things. And then also just having the broader conversations with people. And it's really nice to see those two pieces because business is a really big part of this transformation. And that's another thing that I think is exciting about this piece, is that it's a policy question, but it's not really a policy question. The federal government can kind of be like, hey, this is something that you should pay attention to. But it's really going to be driven by businesses as they realize the risks of continuing their current model, where it's just assuming a constant in-stream of resources and a constant ability to dispose of waste afterwards. That's going to start breaking down, and already has started breaking down in a big way.
Right. I agree with you. It's a really inspiring story that you have. And I agree with you that it's both the governments and the businesses that would need to work together in order to get the ball rolling. And I think the WCEF is a good platform to get things rolling along over here in Canada. That provides a good segue to the WCEF itself. Could you give a bit more information about the three specific events that are going to happen? I understand that from the announcement at the ECCC website that the first event is actually going to be an online event. And then there's going to be a second event in the beginning on the first half of 2021, which will be an online event held in the Netherlands. And the final culmination of the WCF would be next year in September in Toronto. Now, could you give us a bit more details of why it is that three events have been kept rather than just one that was supposed to happen in this year in 2020 in September? And what is it that's going to happen along those three events?
Sure. So we decided to, instead of kind of just pivoting from WCF 2021, the 2020, the plan, and just going online, we decided to create a whole different event for the WCF online. And it's very much focused on how circular economy can be like a tool of recovery from the pandemic, and really trying to get in on this moment where there's so much change happening. Governments are really kind of putting money into stimulus and economies, and they're looking for ways of kind of tying all these questions together, like how do we create innovation while at the same time not hurting our environment and not putting future generations, their future at risk by just, selfishly focusing on what our needs are. So I think that, so that was kind of the idea there, was to really focus on how circular economy can feed into the moment that is happening now. And in going into 2021, the Netherlands was actually going to host the in-person at WCF 2021. But there was kind of a compromise to allow Canada to just put its forward into 2021, because of course we were already very far into planning things. And then the Netherlands, I think very cleverly, has kind of created its own type of event that's very focused on the international climate negotiation piece, taking everything up a level. Often when you go to these big conferences, you can see that you're kind of preaching to the choir, right? It's all the people who already agree with you that have come, which is great, but how do you bring this to people who care about the environment, who are already working very hard on these issues? How do you kind of bring this as a focus for their work? And especially the climate piece, because it's so well developed. Climate negotiations, of course, have been going on for many years. This is COP26. And we have, of course, the Paris Agreement that we're working towards. How do you bring these two worlds together, and how do you demonstrate to the climate world the value of circular economy, the value of not just focusing on the energy piece and just telling people that they should consume less? How do you actually square that circle and drive innovation and create the economy of the future? So I really think that is it seems, I think when people first look at it, it's like a little confusing and what's happening where and what. But I really see an interesting thread between the three of them. And we're, of course, trying to build on things between the 2020 online event, the one in the Netherlands, and then our in-person as well. And just to add more complication, there's also a number of side events, like I mentioned. And we're going to be holding a number of those at the CELC. We're going to be doing one on natural resources, one on energy, one on mining, and two on plastics. And there might be a number of other ones too that are coming out of the Government of Canada, and I will be able to share more information as those are confirmed. But the best part about the way that my job is spread out is that I can make sure that all those kind of link together and build on one another. Often in Canada, even though there's so few people working in this field, everybody is kind of doing their own thing. So especially now that everything is online, we really have to kind of collaborate and coordinate as much as possible. So that's a big part of my job.
Fantastic. And I feel, and going by what I've heard in the news as well, with Netherlands being 25% circular, I think it sets a good stage for interactions between countries as well, in order to promote the larger point of getting the circular economy in place for the planet as a whole, rather than just looking at it locally. And so I wanted to ask you, so we have a lot of people in our group in the CEP Ottawa who want to get into the circular economy. And in order to understand a bit more about the circular economy, I wanted to ask you a few questions about what are the best strong points, or what are some of the inspiring parts of your job that you find really that makes you feel that you want to actually continue working in this field?
I really like session design. So that's mostly what I do, is designing kind of conference sessions or workshops or that kind of thing. And I get to work with, real deep experts in their field. And that's always fun, because I am able to hopefully take their knowledge and their expertise, which is often like very broad and very deep, and kind of distill it down into an event that hopefully really moves the conversation forward. I always try and focus in on like the touch points, where if you touch here, if you push here, what can you actually make happen? What kind of dialogues can you create? I like to, bring friction up, create a little bit of tension between people. I think that there's nothing more boring than an event where everybody, like you have three speakers and they all kind of agree and say the same thing. And I really like that about circular economy, that there is a lot of tension in it, because it deals with real things. So I'm enjoying that piece. I also really am enjoying kind of bringing Canada to the conversation. I think that often we get left out of these broader conversations because people don't really know where Canada fits. We're not the US, we're not Europe, we're not Asia. And we have this kind of distinct identity. And we've been playing more and more on the climate negotiation international side, which has been very nice to see. But kind of broadening the conversation and saying, hey, if you want Canada to be a part of this, these are the kinds of things that we have to start talking about. And that has been very difficult sometimes, but also very rewarding in terms of kind of pushing the ideas and getting people to be like, think about things a little bit differently. And honestly, I just really enjoy the partner engagement side of things. I really get a lot about talking to our big corporate our big corporate partners, primarily because they're really living this. I talk to policy folks and experts, and they're like, this is how the whole mining sector would work. And it's like, cool. And then you're like, your brain is like, but then you go and you talk to, the people who would actually put that into place. And they're like, yes, we tried this, but it didn't work. Or we tried that and it kind of worked. And so we're trying it a little bit more. And it's interesting to really kind of ground the policy and the expert conversation with what's actually possible and what's happening on the ground. And I really appreciate that about the job that I have now.
Oh, I agree. The evolving theory into practice is probably one of the most difficult things that you can do. And for something that is new, like the circular economy, I think it's the right stage where that interaction with policymakers as well as with actual practitioners on the ground is most important, where you'll get that constant feedback and the whole policy itself would change on the basis of that. Now, let me go to the other side now. Now, we talked about the inspiring parts of your job, but I'm pretty sure that during your time, you would have faced some roadblocks as well. What are the most challenging aspects of the work that you face?
I would say kind of the skepticism that we've sometimes faced from people within the environmental field. I think we get a lot of, we're already working on climate stuff. Why complicate things? Why make this more difficult? We're just trying to hold on to this little bit of gains that we have. So I think that is like, there is a legitimate concern there. I also feel that there's a reason why everything is so politicized right now, why it's so difficult to move forward carbon policy is because when you only focus on that piece, you're constantly just making trade-offs, right? You buy an electric vehicle, but then what do you do with the battery afterwards, right? You're just constantly solving one problem and perhaps creating another one. Or you're only greenwashing or making very small marginal changes. And I think that's where we've been stuck for 15, 20 years. And so I'm hoping that really broadening that conversation and kind of putting everything on the table will bust that open. And I think too that carbon policy can be very difficult to understand for people who are not in this field. Whereas circular economy, people get it. Because like I said, it's your grandma's approach to things, right? It's like, don't throw stuff out when you could use it again. Buy stuff that will last. Eat the food in your fridge instead of ordering in, right? Like these are all kind of common sense things that we innately kind of glom onto. And circular economy is a nice term, and it sounds new, but it's an old idea. I mean, Indigenous people have been talking about this forever. This is something that almost all cultures have some aspect on. So that to me is probably the most difficult part, is when people are immediately like, oh, I don't want your buzzword, which is fair. There's a lot of buzz in the sustainability field, and sometimes it can be difficult to kind of bust through that. And then on the other side, I would say too that it's always a fine balance when you're trying to create a coalition of people that, of course, we all can agree to a common vision of circular economy and making things better. But what that looks like at the individual level sometimes doesn't always match up. And it can be especially difficult when you have such a broad idea as circular economy. Again, that's why it's so easy with something like a carbon tax. It's like everybody knows what that is, everybody knows how that impacts them. And you can say, yes, I like it, no, I don't. With circular economy, I think there's a big question of like, sounds good, but what does that mean for me? And unpacking that can sometimes, be difficult and take quite a bit of work and back and forth. And I think it's something that will continue to evolve as well. I think this is just the start, or I hope it is at least.
Oh, it's a wonderful start to have, and I agree with you that the kind of conversations that you would have with, say, some organizations and also with the end consumers would be completely different when you talk about the circular economy. The circular economy for the end consumer would be completely different from what, say, a person in an organization in the supply chain would look at. So those are tough conversations that, of course, we need to have in order to get this thing in place. Before I go on to the next question, of which I do have a lot more, just want to reiterate to the audience that please keep your questions coming. I do see a lot of questions coming in, but please keep them coming, and they will be answered post this conversation with us in about 5 minutes time. So thank you for taking time out and attending this webinar as well. Yeah, so now on to the next question. So for a person entering into this field, and there are a lot of people who have asked about wanting to enter into the circular economy. what are the first few things that they should do? And has the COVID situation actually changed the kind of activities that they would need to do in order to enter the circular economy?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is very much a nascent sector. You know, if you go on LinkedIn and you type in circular economy, you'll get lots of events, but perhaps not very many job postings. And I think that that's because people are kind of still just learning about it. So I would say kind of, first off, learn everything that you can about it, particularly in the sectors that you're interested in, because it's like a whole of economy approach. It really looks at every piece of the sectors, and as well, like every piece along the supply chain. So if you're interested in like sustainable mining, there's everything from, how do you run a mine that is more sustainable to what we call urban mining, which is where you would actually mine waste. So e-waste, food, those kinds of things where you're actually extracting, you're mining a waste, a landfill, etc. So it's really just like broadens out everything. So I would say kind of really delve into the resources that are out there, and I'd be happy to share some of those if people are particularly interested. Some of the big organizations in this area are the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, based out of the UK, Sitra, which is SITRA, which is the Finnish organization, and Smart Prosperity Institute is also doing a lot on this piece. And then I would kind of try and see how you can apply that to the work that you're doing already. Bringing it, if you're already in an organization, bringing it forward. I think that there's avenues to bring it forward that aren't just like, oh, hey, here's a green initiative that we can do, switch out the toilet paper for recycled toilet paper. There's a lot more to it than that. You can say, hey, I see that, we're wasting this thing over here, but if you think about it, that has value. Who might want to buy this from us? And if you kind of turned it into a business model, you would probably get a lot more buy-in and, maybe a raise out of the way you're working on things. And the other sector, like I said, that is really moving is the plastics piece. I think that there's going to be an explosion on that side, and everybody who's not already on that, who's not already looking at their plastic waste, is going to be kind of starting to look around to see who can help them kind of catch up. So I think that that's going to be something that is really coming forward. The federal government is really going to start pushing on that. Of course, we're more hoping for a voluntary-based approach than just a regulatory one to really kind of move the innovation piece forward as much as possible. So I think that is, if you're interested in kind of something that's definitely going to move, I would say that one. And then from there, there's kind of like, there's so much opportunity to create your own thing in this. And that's one of the things that brought me to it was it's always great to be moving into something that's just growing, especially when, you're a younger person and you're looking for something that's going to last and you can actually like grow into. This is one of those areas. This is kind of like what sustainability or sustainable development was 15 years ago or longer. I guess the Brundtland Commission was like 1982 or something.
Yes.
So it's really just at that piece. And I totally recognize that right now people are like, wow, there's almost nobody hiring a job with a title circular economy. But I think in 2 years, that's going to be a switch, particularly on kind of consumer product-based companies. They're really going to be making that switch. Like even Amazon is looking at this kind of stuff. So I think that there's a lot of that. And like I was saying, make your own opportunities. There's lots of businesses kind of coming on board. They're mostly startups. low capital. There's like a cool juicing company out of Toronto that takes food, mostly fruits that aren't pretty enough to go into grocery stores, and they turn them into juice, and then they sell them. And so that's kind of like, that's something that was very easy for them to get into because the fruit wasn't very expensive. They really just had to like make it tasty and then bottle it. And that's kind of the story with circular economy, because you're starting from something that has no value. It's kind of a low entry point. You're not trying to buy Apple stocks. You're just trying to buy the things that Apple is no longer using. So it's a different business model. And I think that people shouldn't be afraid to kind of follow their dreams on that piece.
Right. I think you put it perfectly when you talked about the analogy with Apple products. I think there is an opportunity in every nook and corner, and and as a person wanting to get into the industry, we should look at those opportunities and try and take them as much as we can, and also learn in the process. I think those are the two main themes that I could get from for what new people would want to look at, would want to get into the circular economy. Thank you so much for that. I'll now hand it over to, I think we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience. I'll now hand it over to Lucas, who has been moderating the YouTube live chat and has been taking down all those questions that they have. Lucas, over to you.
Thanks, Kartik. And thanks, Marena. Honestly, it's been a fantastic presentation. Thanks for being here, for being in the hot seat for now 40 minutes and another 20. The audience questions are flowing in. We've had about 20 people throughout the stream. It's been up and down, but it's been a nice turnout for this event so far. Hi to everybody who's been to a CEP event in the past, as well as all the people who are joining for the first time. So I'll start with Shraddha's question. She asked, hi, Marena, would like to know what is the difference between circular economy and sustainability? Which, Marena, I know that you get this question a ton, so it's probably just a good one to answer right off the bat.
Right, thanks. Yeah, that is a question that I often get. And I think it's a very fair one, because people, like I said, are like, well, we already got an idea over here that we're still trying to implement, remember? So for me, sustainability, again, like I was saying, is really the focus on the energy side, or kind of how do we take what we're already doing and make it a little bit less bad? How do we, or I like to call it the add environment and stir version of the approach. It's very much just kind of adding something into it, but continuing down the same road that you were already on. And I know that people have constantly been saying, no, we want to change things, we want to redesign things, but there's never been a concept that I think has really helped people with that. It's always landed on, just do more with less, don't drive, don't buy new clothes, don't do this, don't do that, don't forget your reusable bag. And actually the reusable bag is an excellent example. I'm glad I thought of it. Because it's something that I think was very much pushed, and for a lot of people is like a visual symbol of being sustainable. And they're actually not very sustainable. You have to use a polyester bag something like 1,000 times before it actually replaces the number of plastic bags that you would have used. And I don't think people think of that, because we've been really conditioned to be like, plastic bags bad, CF light bulbs bad, these things good, therefore sustainable. But if you're not thinking about the waste aspect, if you're not thinking about the resource aspect, you're always just going to be stuck in that loop. And so bringing the consumption piece to the fore, but not making it about just doing less or buying less, and bringing the resources piece, I think is really key and really separates out sustainability from circular economy. And to be honest, there's a huge political value to changing the conversation, to changing the language. When we first brought in the carbon tax, we got death threats at my work because, it's a very weird thing, but because people were so upset. And it's because there's just this immense politicization of the issue. And that can be very disheartening. And I don't think the answer is to just like walk away. I think it's to be like, okay, what are people mad about? And then also to try and change the conversation. And I think that people kind of see that we're not always being 100% honest when we say, oh, well, this reusable bag is sustainable, right? People are starting to see that a lot of that maybe isn't holding up, and they're getting mad about it. So how do we address those issues? And I would say that circular economy is the answer to that. Does that cover it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is even more than we bargained for in that answer. Thanks, Shraddha, for that question. From Janesh, our next question is, hi, Marena, what are the incentives for different stakeholders participating in the circular economy? Great question.
That is a good question. So yeah, I like to think about it as resiliency, particularly at the local and individual business level. That is probably the biggest driver. So if you take kind of let's stick with mining. So if you take a mining town, they're so dependent on that mine, and that mine is so dependent on selling that one metal to, you know, a few markets, that when that gets disrupted, it's just this huge ripple effect. But if you can diversify the income streams for that mine or that mining town, even better, then you're kind of spreading out, you're spreading out jobs, you're spreading out economic activity, you're just making things more resilient. By taking waste, by taking something that has no value currently, and turning it into something that people can sell, that people can work with. And it's a kind of a local diversification strategy. And I see a lot of possibility, particularly for small businesses, indigenous businesses, to be like, oh, we're gonna try this thing over here and see if it works. So I think for like our rural resource-based economies, there's a big piece there. And for individual businesses, it's the same argument. You know, you can, instead of just taking inputs and producing one thing, you can look at your waste and be like, oh, actually, I can sell all these different things. And then just diversifying again your income stream and reducing your costs by no longer having to pay to dispose of your waste. And there's kind of this additional idea of like, you know, we have supply shocks and we have demand shocks, but we also have waste shocks. And you saw that with China bringing in its plastics ban. And like overnight, the world didn't know what to do with all this recyclable plastic that they've been just shipping out to China. And that is a waste shock because it really rippled through our system and has increased costs and bankrupted municipalities. So we have to start thinking about these pieces as well. So those are the first two. I would say also municipalities have a lot to gain here, especially because they're at the level where they can start bringing in food. Circular economy Guelph is doing a really interesting work with that, where they're like collecting their compost and using it not just as like soil, but actually to like grow more food and make more food accessible, and they're trying to reduce their food waste. And I think in terms of Canada's incentives, it's just to make sure that we're still in it in 20 years, you know, that we haven't just still continue to cut down logs and ship them out, and, you know, mining goods and ship them out. We have to actually like, it would take us to a secondary level of production. So not just primary, but actually deepening our economy as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And I think it segues nicely into the next question, actually, because when you talk about the incentives, I mean, increasing resilience is huge. especially with these examples like China and some of the other kind of shocks that have gone through the system. However, it does kind of beg the question, which Chris P has asked, which is, what are the infrastructural requirements? And to add on top of that, his question is, what do you think would be the infrastructure needed in Canada for circular economy approaches to materialize? And should we look up to countries such as the Netherlands? And if I can add on to that, are there risks that you're aware of in some of the current infrastructure discussions that also play into that?
So infrastructure is always an interesting question because it really locks you in, right? And especially at this moment of time when we're putting so much money into stimulus, the decisions we're making today are the ones that we're going to still have to be living with, in 30, 40, 50 years. And so in terms of I wouldn't say that there's a lot of national level infrastructure. It'll be a lot of infrastructure at the individual business and sector level that will be creating more. I would say I will probably end up having to invest more in transport because we're moving more stuff. We're not just moving inputs, but we're also moving outputs and waste and everything. So I think that there will kind of be a broadening in transportation. So we'll need more ways of doing renewable or low carbon transportation. So I'm not as familiar with the Netherlands, to be honest, and what they're doing. I've been really focused on Canada and other resource producing countries such as Germany, Finland, etc. But what we're really looking at on our side is how do you create like a circular carbon economy? How do you take the resources that we already are exploiting and make them circular? So, reusing the CO2 that comes out, working with green and blue hydrogen. All these kinds of ideas are really coming forward because, of course, we have renewable energy, but if the green transition will actually increase our global resource use. So how do you still produce the materials that we need in order to do the green transition is going to be a huge question. You're on mute.
Yeah, I think, you're on mute.
Yeah, and I guess we'll watch the answers to that one unfold as time goes on, right? To what the best approach is. Thank you. So one more question came in from Jim, and then I actually have one for you as well. So Jim's asked, how does durability relate to circular economy?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's often one that people think of as well. Durability is one of the key things. So there's kind of a couple different ways that you can extend the life of a product. One is that it's not owned by one person, but that like multiple people use it, so we're thinking of a sharing economy type of thing. Or you create very durable products, or you create products that can be taken down into component parts and then reassembled into something else, or just reassembled into a new version of itself. IKEA is really looking at this quite closely, and it makes a lot of sense for their business model already, that you would kind of rent a couch and then take it back to them when you don't want it anymore, and they would be able to like take it back apart and turn it into 2 armchairs or something like that. But durability is probably the easiest of all of them. That goes back to that grandma approach of like buy things that are gonna last, and that's one that is, I would say, is actually, so it's the easiest to implement physically, but it's the most difficult to implement from a business perspective, because what is the business model of something that lasts a really long time? How you would have to sell so many more of them. So what is, and I think this is a question that a lot of different places are trying to figure out. Do you go to a subscription model where the actual thing lasts for, let's say, like a laptop. They build a laptop that lasts a really long time, but they sell you a software subscription where they just continually update the software for you. So the physical piece lasts, but it continues to be something new and there continues to be revenue for the company. But I think durability is a really an interesting one because, like I said, a lot of companies are just unsure how to make it work. They want to. Levi's is talking about this a lot. You know, jeans last forever, right? Like it used to be something that miners would wear because it's such a durable material. So Levi's could sell something that would last for 25 years, but then would they still be around in 25 years because they sold things that lasted that long? So that's something that is being decided, and I think will eventually be regulated.
Yeah, I think that definitely begs many questions as well in terms of like, how can you regulate? What should the approaches be? What can the incentives be? But that'll be a conversation for another time. One more has come in from Janesh, and he's asked, Marena, could you please elucidate on the different implementation phases for the circular economy? And what do you see as the starting point, and potentially for people or countries, municipalities who haven't taken that step yet, where do you begin? And what kind of phases can you use to roll that out? And maybe you could focus on a particular case study to help illustrate this, rather than answering in broad strokes. I'm not sure.
So I'll take the municipal angle because I find that that's probably the easiest. So what I've seen with municipalities is they kind of start with what is a problem that they're trying to solve. So Guelph started with, you know, they had higher obesity than they wanted to have. They had terrible numbers on childhood, like childhood nutrition. People were saying that they didn't have access to good quality food. And I think normally a municipality would be like, well, that's not our problem. You know, like that's not fire, water, police. But I think much to their to their credit, they have decided, okay, actually feeding our people is our problem. And the only way to do that is to close the loop, because I think once you start looking at it that way, you immediately see that the problem is the waste. You know, not necessarily that there isn't enough food in the system, it's that it's not being allocated appropriately. And that a lot of it is being wasted. You see numbers, everything from like 30 to 50% of the food in our system is wasted. And then at the same time, you have people who don't have enough. So how do you square that circle? And I think, so the first step is like, find your problem. And then the next one is decide if it's a waste problem, which I think a lot of these things are, you know, inequality, all these kinds of pieces where really it's just a misallocation. And then I hate to say it's always find funding. And luckily Guelph was able to put this in under like a smart cities grant, and they received over $1 million from the federal government, and really took this kind of data heavy, digital heavy approach to solving that. Which I think was really smart because it really brought in a whole different group of people and created an alliance that you wouldn't normally see in this sector, right? You don't normally see the like AI dudes working with the food waste people. But whenever you can kind of create those alliances, you really get cool and new solutions and a lot of momentum. And that's what Guelph has been able to do. And then it's always just like, once you have something, get out there and talk to people about it. You know, build greater alliances, link into national organizations, just try and see as much as you can move things. And then of course, you know, looking internationally, there's a lot of the organizations that I mentioned earlier are very interested in connecting with people here in Canada and are very open to kind of helping bridge gaps and find resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that question, Janesh. That was a really interesting one. So we're approaching the end of the meeting, and I love to end on time. I know the stream is a couple minutes behind us, so we should be perfect with this. If I can end with my question. First, I'd like to thank you again for speaking and for sharing these ideas and for pushing the circular economy in Canada. And I'd like to bring it back to one of the points that you mentioned kind of quickly in the presentation and throughout, which is that circular economy is really based on old ideas, very, very old concepts, and somehow they've been lost. And my question is, you know, in your view, where did we lose them? And how can we potentially get back to this seemingly natural and traditional way of thinking?
Yeah, I think we lost it because people really felt like they needed to focus in on one thing, and that thing is climate change. And that's hard to argue with. And it really kind of everything kind of really narrowed to that point. And in that conversation, there was that pushback of like, okay, but we just want to talk about like windmills and solar panels and electric vehicles. We don't want to talk about, not consuming. We don't want to talk about not driving. We don't want to talk about like actually changing our system, because I think that a lot of people thought that that was too scary to talk about that broadly. And so there's been this divide of, you get the David Suzuki Foundations of the world that are really focused on, individual changes and habit changes. And then you kind of get the more policy people on the other side. And then the resource people really got kind of sidelined. They've been talking about this the whole time, but they haven't really had much traction. And I think too, we kind of went through this golden era of globalization, where maybe it kind of did feel like maybe we didn't have any limits on us. When you can ship all your black plastic to China, why would you address the problem? Right? We really created, because our borders just melted away, we really created this sense of limitlessness. So I think that has ended. I think COVID has ended that. I think that population change has ended that. And now people are kind of looking around being like, oh, we have a really big problem. We have a really big waste problem, and we have a really big resource problem. And how do we solve all these problems at once? So I think that that's really driving that shift now.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the answer. We've got one more question coming in from Bob. Do you have a couple more minutes to answer one more, Marena? All right. And then I think this will be the last ones that we can end just about on time. So from Bob Donnelly, do you have any specific industrial or commercial examples of resource rationalization and the commercial or environmental benefit? And I think a couple have been mentioned throughout, and you could perhaps add another.
Sure. Bioeconomy is one that a lot of people like to talk about. The paper and the forestry industry has been at this perhaps the longest of anybody, because they very quickly realize that there's a limit to paper now. Everything's gone digital. So what kinds of things can we make from wood? And that was kind of their driver. They had an economic driver, but they ended up in the circular economy because now we're talking about how do you make skyscrapers from wood? All the different types of paper products that you can make. Very much now they're saying anything that you can make out of cement, you can make out of timber. And with much, much lower GHG emission costs. And then this idea of you can then take that wood and turn it into ashes or turn it into other products first, and then put it back into the ground and grow more trees. So it is like, it's the classic example that we always like to use, because I think it's the one that you can most easily see that circular piece. And it really ties it into, the regeneration part, which I think is also missing from a lot of the conversations about sustainability. So that I think that that's always the one that people kind
Thank you. Kartik, do you want to close it off? Oh, you're on mute as well.
Yeah, I'm on mute now this time. Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, thank you so much for this engaging conversation. We just have one comment from Aditya Patel coming here, saying, thank you, CEP Ottawa and Marena, for sharing interesting aspects about the circular economy. You are right about the terminology and language about sustainability, and it certainly needs to be changed. I think that sums up also the conversation that we've had, the need to educate people about the circular economy and the fact that this needs policies and everything needs to change and evolve as we move ahead. So Marena, thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule to interact with us. I really appreciate you coming here and talking to us about the circular economy. I also want to thank Lucas and the CP Ottawa team for organizing this. And yeah, have a lovely evening and a lovely rest of the week.